I believe that you believe that there is some kind of Marxist influence, postmodernist plot that's hatching in our universities. Hatched in our universities to do what? What is this conspiracy?
Well, the stated goals of the conspiracy, so to speak, can be found on the websites of disciplines like women's studies. It's to bring down the oppressive patriarchal structure of the West. And that's a deadly serious aim by all means possible, including an assault on the basic categories that we use to orient ourselves in the world. And so the theory is driven by the idea that the best way to construe Western civilization is as a power structure basically produced by men for men that's fundamentally oppressive and that needs to be dismantled from the bottom up. And so it's easy to find out what the aim is because it's stated very clearly, to produce activists to bring that about. And that's especially true of disciplines like women's studies and the cultural studies disciplines.
You hate those courses, don't you?
Well, it's not so much that I hate them, it's that I'm embarrassed to be part of the university because of what the universities are doing.
You claim that there's sort of pseudoscience or false science.
It's not a claim. It's absolutely the case that it's not even, you can't even call it pseudoscience because it's not science. It's just driven by a set of ideological presuppositions, the most pernicious of which is that the best way to understand history and understand people is as a consequence of their group identity, which is unbelievably dangerous because what it does is push us back towards a tribal direction. Responsibility. That's what gives life meaning. It's like lift a load. Then you can tolerate yourself, right? Because look you're useless, easily hurt, easily killed. Why should you have any self-respect? It's like, really? That's the counterculture. Grow the hell up and do something useful. Really? I could do that? Oh, I'm so excited by that idea. No one ever mentioned that before. It's like rights, 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 rights. Jesus, it's appalling. And I feel that that's deeply felt by the people who are coming out to listen to these sorts of things too. They've had enough of that. So, and they better have, because it's a non-productive mode of being. Responsibility, man. That's where the meaning in life is. All killed or raped and robbed by the collectivists who insisted that because they showed signs of wealth, they were criminals and robbers. So, and one of the consequences of the prosecution of the kulaks was the death of 6 million Ukrainians from a famine in the 1930s. The idea of collectively held guilt at the level of the individual as a legal or philosophical principle is dangerous. It's precisely the sort of danger that people who are really looking for trouble would push. So, and just a cursory glance at 20th century history should teach anyone who wants to know exactly how unacceptable that is. But that's I think what the difference between, I'm talking about compelled speech. There's a difference between saying that there's something you can't say and saying that there are things that you have to say. And I regard these made-up pronouns, all of them, as the neologisms of radical PC authoritarians. Do you understand that? And I'm not a fan of that sort of person. And the reason I'm not a fan of that sort of person is because I've done my homework. I've read everything I can get my hands on in the development of authoritarian political systems, and I know the literature inside out and backwards. And I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest. And that's that. With regards to the universities, I thought at one point that the best thing to do would be to cut their funding by 25% and let them fight amongst themselves for the remnants, because it would force the universities to decide exactly what's important and what isn't. So I would say the humanities and much of the social sciences has turned into a postmodern neo-Marxist playground for radicals. The scholarship is terrible. 80% of humanities papers aren't cited once. And so what that means is that they write papers for each other and they sell them to libraries, and that's how the publishers make their money. And no one reads them, but the publishers can print them because the libraries have to buy them, and they're buying them with your tax money. And so all of you who are sitting here are funding
a postmodern, radical, neo-Marxist agenda that has its roots in the university, and your tax money is going towards that. And if you want proof of that, you just go online and look at the websites, especially of disciplines like women's studies, which is pathological right to the core. But it's not just women's studies, it's all the ethnic studies groups. It's anthropology, it's sociology, it's social work, and most of all, it's education. And OISE, for example, in Ontario, is perhaps, apart from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the most dangerous institution in Canada. It should be defunded. It's as simple as that. They don't do the research they purport to do. They're not interested at all in education. They're interested in the indoctrination of people as young as they can get their hands on, so to speak. Now we need to figure out, our society needs to figure out how to stop shunting public tax money to radical left-wing activists. If we were doing that for radical right-wing activists, there would be an absolute storm. But it's happened incrementally since the 1960s, and it needs to stop. Who I'm a great admirer of, once described an old religious idea, and that was that God ruled the world with two hands, right and left, mercy and justice. And the world couldn't survive if only mercy applied, because then no one would ever be encouraged to adopt the trappings and responsibilities of adulthood. You end up in a situation where you're forgiven for absolutely everything you do or fail to do. You're thrust into the Freudian nightmare of the Oedipal family, where your utter uselessness is forgiven on the grounds of compassion, and you end up living in your mother's basement until you produce fantasies as a consequence of your squelched development of perhaps going out and shooting up a high school. Mercy, in its excess, produces pathology. Justice in its excess produces pathology too, because people are not perfect, and that means that we all fail when we attempt to do the things that we know that we should do. And so being held to account for our failures has to be tempered by mercy, but both principles have to apply. Justice means there's structure and rules, and the people who abide by the structure and play by the rules and move towards the top win. And mercy means we're forgiven our failures so that we can rise up and play again. But you can't have one without the other, because the world falls apart if you do. And this is my problem with tolerance, because tolerant people, first of all, let's say those who proclaim the virtues of tolerance, believe that they're tolerant, but generally that's not the case. They just don't want to accept the responsibility that playing by the rules would bring.
Have this crazy alliance between the feminists and the radical Islamists that I just do not get. It's like the feminists, it's like why they aren't protesting nonstop about Saudi Arabia is just completely beyond me. Like, I do not understand it in the least. And I wonder too, I just wonder bloody well, this is the Freudian me, is like, is there an attraction, you know, is there an attraction that's emerging among the female radicals for that totalitarian male dominance that they've chased out of the West? And I mean, that's a hell of a thing to think, but after all, I am psychoanalytically minded, and I do think things like that. Because, like, I just can see no rational reason for it. The only other rational reason is that, well, the West needs to fall, and so the enemy of my enemy is...
My friend,
exactly. Now, what is it? I got that wrong, but...
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yes, exactly.
And that's why Islamists tend to vote liberal as well.
Yes, well, so that could be the case. But I'm not going to shake my suspicion about this unconscious balancing, because as the demand for egalitarianism and the eradication of masculinity accelerates, there's going to be a longing in the unconscious for the precise opposite of that, right? The more you scream for equality, the more your unconscious is going to admire dominance.